Okay, my name is Lucian. I am the Director of Software Development at Hunter Industries. About 7 years ago, our team coined the term mob programming, which I think has become popular in Japan recently. And today I want to talk to you about learning to experiment and what that means for organizations, especially when there's situations where things are working just good enough that nothing changes. So who in the room is currently doing Scrum exactly the way that it was defined in the book? Are there, yeah? Has anybody tried to change Scrum using retrospectives? Change your sprint size? Has anybody tried to change your sprint size? Look around and kind of see that. So one key point is that Scrum is a starting place, and the retrospectives should be able to make it Scrum adapt for you. So I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. So I'll go into the days without experimentation. So I've worked for organizations in the past that have essentially stopped changing, and the main result was that things appeared to be good, but in reality, because the landscape of software development over time changes so frequently, it became apparent quickly that we were maybe stagnating in a way. And so things did not change gradually over time. And so there's a trouble with not having emergencies in my eyes, because I don't know if the term exists, but a frog boiling in water. I don't know if that exists in Japan, but the idea is that it's a common analogy in the US, and it's the idea that the frog cannot sense the temperature difference, and so it will sit in a pot of water that comes to a boil until it is cooked, and it doesn't realize that anything negative has ever happened. And so in the situation here, I think that it's very important to pay attention when you're in that situation. So your competitors may be changing faster than you are, and everything appears to be okay until you suddenly find yourself far behind your competitors. And so one thing that you need to have is a cycle time on your process improvement. And so cycle time is your competitive advantage, and these are bicycles in the background on the wall. But when you don't iterate on your process, when you leave it the same constantly, then you can be in a dangerous situation. Does anybody? You may feel that way now, even if you're thinking about it. So what I'd like to talk about is that in my career, there have been big, important changes to the way that we worked, and unfortunately, they only came when there were large emergencies that occurred. So right now, this is our environment, and we're doing mob programming on 8 mobs, 30 people in the department. It's a flat department structure, so there are no managers. Things are very safe. Feedback gets into the system very quickly. We're practicing pure Kanban for task priority, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And this came through a need that was caused by an emergency. And I think that everybody can get to the point where you're releasing software daily, you're not having bug reports, you can eliminate your bug databases, and you can create a good culture within your team. And I don't think that it takes emergencies to make it happen. And so this is why I want to convince you today that you should start experimenting on your process. So why wait for hell to break loose? And so in the case of the previous emergencies, the emergency acted as a catalyst for change, and then the negative things that were holding us back a lot of the time basically were abandoned in exchange for trying to iterate faster and get to a better spot. And so, but why did we wait that long? How did we get to the point where we could be overtaken by our competitor, or how did we get to the point where we allowed something to flounder for very long? Or even if there's an obvious problem, and many people are complaining, a lot of companies will stick with the direction just because it was part of their 3-year plan. So how do we learn to experiment? This is the Leo Carrillo Ranch. He's a famous actor, and there's a ranch by my house. And it's very interesting because it's a tourist attraction, but it's right next to me, right? And so, I had no idea about it. I didn't know anything about it, and we decided, let's try an experiment. Let's just try and get out of the house more and see things around us. And so, let's find one of the closest touristy things to do and go do it ourselves. And it was a very interesting experience because there was a lot of peacocks there, and so you can see the peacock, the bird, in the corner there, the cactus, and it was a very beautiful experience. There were 100, 200 peacocks all in this old ranch, and we were, from an exploration standpoint, we were kind of stagnating. So I think one initial thing that needs to occur is safety in all senses, and the safety to give critical feedback to one another, the safety to receive that feedback without taking it as an offense, psychological safety from Amy Edmondson's work research, and this is a picture of the team all taking a walk together. And we recently got team shirts put together and things like that. And in that we have a very fluid culture, and people are willing to talk to each other and socialize, and that can also lead to a higher level of safety, especially when people are taking lunches together and things like that. So there's also this idea of stop the line and safety to experiment. And so if you said, I want to change my sprint from 2 weeks to 1 week, do you feel safe enough right now to be able to do that? Could you tell your manager that you felt like that was the right thing to do? Could you tell them that you thought it was a good idea to remove estimates from your process? So stop the line and safety to experiment is this idea that the team is trusted to change something about the process in order to make things better. And usually you do this as a group together and work it out. And so the stop the line alludes to the Toyota manufacturing stop the line and being able to notice a problem and fix it right away. So there's also a concept of budgeting experiments. And so this pottery was made by my father. And so for 13 years, he made about 8 pots a day, and every one was an experiment. He created new ones, and eventually he mastered a technique called chattering, which puts a nice texture on the outside of it. And he did that not by figuring out how to do it perfectly and planning on doing it. He made, thousands upon thousands of pots, and even to this day, they're floor to ceiling in his apartment. And it's an interesting thing because they came out very beautifully after many iterations of them, and so I often give them as gifts. So another thing is that a lot of people may believe they're experimenting, but if your experiments always work, there is definitely a very interesting issue with that. And so there's this concept in medicine called LD50, or lethal dose, 50%. So 50% of the time something will die to a certain dosage. And you kind of want this analogy to exist in your experimentation. So if none of your experiments are failing, it is likely that you're in a state of complacency. And it can be very hard for your team to have a cycle time related to the, compared to your competitor, and it may appear that you do. And so be wary of a situation where you have essentially the same thing all the time. Now, the learning sessions here are an interesting thing because they're a fuel for the experiments. They're space to find answers and expand your minds, right? And so one thing is that we do 7 hours of learning every week. So an hour at the beginning of the day every day, and then 2 hours at the end of the day on Friday. And what that does is it allows you to take in new ideas. And so you may notice that whenever somebody joins your team, for example, you get new ideas all of a sudden in your process. But then slowly, those new ideas stop coming. And then if you have the same team for a very long time, they might get into a mode of working where they don't change things very much until maybe they hire a new person on. And so what's interesting here is that you can prevent that from happening by having learning sessions. And then the second part to this that I think is very important is retrospectives. And not retrospectives where you come out with 1,000 action items, and not retrospectives where you come out with no action items. I think retrospectives in the sense where you have one single point, one single action item that you act on, and then you come back around and retrospect again. And what that does is it provides a loop, an iterative loop, that will slowly improve your team over time. Even your failures will be beneficial to you because those failures will lead to further learning, and then you'll know what works and doesn't work for you. And so it's a continually improving process. And so some of our teams, they do a micro retrospective every 45 minutes. Some of our teams do retrospectives once a week, but there's regular retrospectives in the process all throughout the system. I'll talk a little bit about the start of mob programming. So we had learning sessions going for about 3 months, and the team was originally essentially waterfall, and there was a developer on the team that asked for help, and they said, can we go do a code kata like in our learning session, but let's just get together and work on this deadline together, all at the same keyboard, because I'm stuck and I have no way to move forward. And it was very brave of them to come to the team and say that. And so what happened from there was we started with a conference room, and we were there for 1 day, and then we retrospected and said, we want to keep doing this, this is very effective. And then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, until the organization provided us a space for it, which kind of looks like that. And that wasn't the only thing. That was an experiment, and it succeeded, and it was a cry for help. It wasn't an emergency, for example, that caused us to be there. So then unit testing also came into our process this way. We were not doing any unit testing, and we were doing regular learning sessions, and we were doing katas. And so I don't know if the game tic-tac-toe is common in Japan. It's the X's and O's. Okay, it is. And so we've made the tic-tac-toe game using test-driven development over and over and over again. Intentional practice, a code kata, that allowed us to slowly improve our skills, and then eventually it became natural for everyone on the team to start doing unit testing together at the same time, because we had learned it together, and we each had an idea of how it works. This also happened for continuous delivery and continuous integration, and so we learned a platform through intentional learning, intentional practice called GoCD. It's a platform from ThoughtWorks. And we'd experimented with other systems, but it never made it into our production environment until we had dedicated learning time around it. In this particular case, we knew that we needed it, but we didn't know how to do it, so we brought in a trainer, but then we practiced it for a while, and eventually we were able to automate all of our builds. That was very important for us because we were delivering daily, but we were in Visual Studio in C#, right-clicking and hitting publish to staging environment, and then our network team would copy it over. And the system was able to eliminate that for us, and so that made us more productive in the end. But a lot of people try to get there, but never find it very hard. Another experiment that had become successful, and I'll talk about failures later as well, but another one is our flat structure. So this is, as we were growing the team, there was a period of time where we had no manager, and all of us reported directly to the director of IT. And slowly over time then, we were approved to scale what we were doing. And I was made the director of a new software department at the company. And I asked the team, do we want to continue to have managers? One manager for each of the 4 projects and things like that. And everybody agreed that it wasn't the right idea. And so I do a lot to try and remove myself from the decision making as a leader. And then everybody is on equal footing and can give each other critical feedback without insulting each other or challenging the hierarchy. An example of an experiment that succeeded at first but then failed later is a management Kanban. So this is the idea that we said, okay, rather than having managers, let's go ahead and remove the manager and instead create a Kanban board that is purely management tasks. And anybody on the team can go and pull them. So you're interested in budgeting, please go ahead and do the budgeting for us. You're interested in promoting a book club within the group, please go ahead and create a book club and we'll read books together. Okay? And so this worked very long, but what it did was it created an unlimited amount of capacity to do management work. It was taking away a lot of developers' time. And so it's important to pay attention to when things go bad, because I think one thing that a lot of people are not aware of in their own system is, do you know in your teams today, how does a bad practice leave your system? How does your team stop doing something wrong? Even though maybe on the outside it appears it's working, or it's obvious that it's not working, but it continues to exist. Is there a way currently that bad practices can leave the system of your environment? It's very important that we find that for ourselves, because it's very easy to start doing something, and it's very difficult to stop doing it. In this picture here, we're doing a retrospective and trying to decide on whether or not to keep something, a practice that had made its way into our system through other previous retrospectives, and there's lots of discussion around it. And so, for example, the management Kanban left, and then the Management Homeowners Association came in. So a homeowners association in the United States is this idea that if you buy a detached home, or if you're part of a condominium or something, that you can join a community that will pay all the community bills together. That's called a homeowners association. And typically they have a voting structure that will allow them to put people in charge of different responsibilities and things along those lines. And so what we did is we said, what different tasks are there? Let's have a facilitator that does a retrospective on that task and is responsible for delegating responsibilities, and then maintain that regularly so that we can remove repetitive management tasks from the system. And so a lot of it is volunteer driven. A lot of people have a lot of agency in making those changes. So it's a very interesting practice. Flyway DB and ReadyRoll are two softwares for doing database continuous delivery. So after a while, we realized that one of the most difficult things that we had to deal with was deploying our databases was one of our last manual processes. We had to basically tell our database administrator, okay, go ahead and run this in production and go ahead and transfer this over to production. This allowed us to take our schema changes and any data manipulation that we needed to do. We could write scripts, and it would automatically take the schema changes, and then we could manually write scripts to put them in. This system would deploy it on every stage of the pipeline all the way down. And so Flyway is open source, ReadyRoll is from Red Date, but that came into our process because, again, through learning sessions, it was we had a developer spend a lot of learning sessions and then come back and say, I already know how to do it. Let's mob together, and I will show everybody how to do it. After that, we realized that our stored procedures were the only things really untested, except by integration tests. And the same type of story. There was a retrospective, or there was learning sessions that preceded it, and then that developer then did group learning sessions around a technology called T-SQL-T, which allows you to unit test your stored procedures. And so gradually over time, we automated away more and more of the ways. And so if you did a lean value stream map today of your workflow, you may find a lot of different manual processes or things that can be considered waste in a lean system. And through this learning and experimenting loop, you can build these practices over time. And so one thing that I recommend people do is don't envy everything that we do. I'll talk about that a little bit more. We also worked on this, and I'll talk about this in a lot more detail later, but this is our lofty goals. And this came through retrospectives and learning around these different concepts. And so we wanted to say, how do we interact? How do we code? How do we do business? And how do we innovate? And then I will go into each of these in later slides, but this was really important to us, and we even asked for feedback on Twitter and things along those lines. And so we made it a very collaborative thing. And what that did was it kind of unified our direction and gave people on the team a framework for doing this. And it was created by the team members and not by any one leader. I think that's very important, is that, the book Turn the Ship Around was mentioned in yesterday's keynote. And that style of management is kind of portrayed in that situation. This is another experiment. We realized that our domain knowledge was kind of leaking out as we were scaling the teams. And so what happened here was that we started doing behavior-driven development using a language called Gherkin, which allowed us to set up a given, when, then, and that would be code that the product owner could be able to read in natural English that then translated into automated test steps. And so we basically had this idea that all documentation must be automated on the team. And so if you can't execute your documentation, then it had a high risk of becoming stale. And so it's kind of an interesting practice in that sense. A great example of a massively failed experiment is this attempt to gamify learning and put tracking on it and things like that. And so when we talked about it, what we created was what were called learning guilds. And it was an attempt at having technical mentors within the team be easily accessible and have a sort of class that they defined themselves and delivered to people. And then we tried it for a while, and participation was initially okay. And we invested a lot of time and effort into this, and I think we learned two major things from this system failing. One is that there's a place for gamification in the system, and this wasn't it. And the other one was to run even smaller experiments. And so we could have done this at a much smaller level that involves more people. And it's important to pay attention to that. It's also important to pay attention to unintentional experiments. And what I mean by unintentional experiments is that there are things happening in your organizations right now that if you created a hypothesis around their outcomes, you may be able to figure them out, figure out what will end up happening or not. And I have a great example of this, and the main idea here is that if you see something that, a behavior, a habit, a system that you feel could lead to something good or something bad, pay attention to it, start tracking some data around it, and then reflect on that data later. Right? It's very easy to forget that you had a bad feeling about something in the future. So if you have a note to yourself to say, come back and look at this again later, it can be very important. So this is my tale of 4 product owners. So on the top left, I have the Ninja there. That was our product owner that was there all the time. They were co-located. They were at a desk next to us, and they were working on their own work, but they could be asked a question at any time, face to face. We then had a product owner on a separate project that was showing up once a day, and we had a meeting around that once a day. We had a product owner that was available only once a week, had some ideas, gave them to the team, and then kind of went away. And then we had a product owner, the bottom right, who was there once a month. And what we found was I had a bad feeling about this disparity, and I started paying attention. And what was important to pay attention to, one thing that I was paying attention to that became important and showed something interesting, was the amount of meeting time in each situation. And that had led to some very interesting side effects, especially since the product owner that showed up once a month had shown up, and essentially there was 6 hours or more of meeting time created for the team each week that could have been answered by a simple question. And it was because everybody was talking about their assumptions going forward. This might be an inflammatory argument, but I'll say it anyway. There are dangers to estimating in your process, and so estimation will reward people who are repetitive. I'll talk about this a little bit more later. It punishes new ideas, and so if you have a new idea, but you have a 3-year-long project with a tight schedule, and you come in on an iteration and you want to try that new idea, how many people feel safe enough to add that idea to the backlog? And the sat-here change model is typically neglected. So that's very similar to the storming, forming, norming, and performing. You have your baseline productivity. Every time you make a change, it dips. And then and then over time, you get to your new norm, which is hopefully higher and not lower, right? And the sat-here change model is not included in estimation, right? Another interesting thing that was very informative to us was that our retrospectives actually grew throughout the business. So the people who liked to coach and the people who wanted to facilitate retrospectives, they started reaching out to other departments over time. So we were only doing retrospectives within our team, and then it became our department, and then it became many departments, and then now even executives are holding retrospectives. This is a great example of the distribution of innovation theory occurring for a good practice. One thing that needs to happen is it must be transparent. It must be must be consistent, and there must be results coming from it. And we showed that with retrospectives throughout the business. So one thing that, if you want a good practice to grow within your company, if that good practice does not have transparency, or it does not have results, or it does not have consistency, then it'll be very difficult to grow that practice. Does anybody in the room consider themselves a change agent at their organization? They're changing something, or they're maybe informing a new process. There was one or two. And so in those situations, if you feel like you want to influence change, making it transparent, and then paying attention to that transparency is also important. So understanding whether or not something is working and not being tied to it because you're passionate about it, but proving it out that it can work. And I'll talk a little bit about first order and second order effects later that can be part of it. So this is a Monte Cristo sandwich. There's a very popular one at Disneyland in the United States. It's French toast, ham, cheese, powdered sugar. It's very good. And then we have a restaurant that serves Monte Cristos as well near us. And the flavor is about the same. Presentation maybe is a little bit different. But I don't think that they went and looked at Disneyland's sandwich, right, to make their own. They made their own. They got customer feedback. They improved it. And this is a key point that I want to give to everyone here. Don't try and change everything all at once. The Big Bang releases don't work for software. The Big Bang launches for Agile are even more dangerous, I think. And it's important to not envy the practices of others, but create a virtuous loop that can get rid of complacency, right? And so when we are complacent, it's very easy to allow things to just ride. And I even talked to some former coworkers at a previous company, and I said, you too can change things for yourselves. And I said, I'm just going to go to retirement and let everything just burn afterwards. And it was very unfortunate thinking. And you can affect positive change in your organizations, and you can create an atmosphere where there is feedback and provide information to others to help make things transparent. And when they're transparent, they can be improved, and you can then instill a cycle of continuous improvement. I'm going to talk about inclusivity and sharing credit. So there's a side effect in the patent system, or organizations that do patents. If they reward the patent with a financial benefit to the creator of that patent, what will happen? I think what we've seen is that those people don't share their idea with anyone else until they can get the patent. And what happens when you don't have collaboration? You eliminate the best possible idea that you could have had that idea been shared initially. And so to develop the patents, it's better to have a culture of being inclusive and sharing credit with others, having the safety to say, this is my idea, and trusting your coworker to not steal your idea in that environment. That can create much better ideas. That will create more success for the company and more success for you. Maybe some people you have recognized in this picture. Paying attention to the diffusion of innovation theory is also very important. So this is the idea of early adopters, the early majority, crossing the chasm, the majority, the late majority, and or early majority, late majority, and then laggards. And this is the idea that finding the people that are willing to take on a new idea and run with it, and be transparent about their successes and failures, can really be a positive thing. And no matter what form that comes from. And so, mod programming crossed the Pacific Ocean very quickly. and has, then there are early adopters that have been trying it, and it's been growing and growing, and they've been transparent with their successes, and I think it's very important. I don't know what this dish was, but I was experimenting a lot the last time I was here in Japan. I know this came out with natto or something. It was something fermented and seaweedy, and it was. And so just not being afraid to do the experiment, right? You may be uncomfortable. I think I was very uncomfortable with this dish. and so, but I just went with it, and it was a very interesting experience. I was told yesterday that interesting is a good word for something like that. And it was a benefit to me to have done it, and a benefit to my relationships with other people, and being transparent about what I felt about it afterwards. It was also very good. And I suggest that you don't need to do anything differently than you are now, except for two main things. The first one is start learning sessions. The ideas that go into the work that you do are going to be limited by the amount of new information coming into your team. And if you're always executing on producing new code and never learning anything new, then you'll have a side effect of getting no new ideas. Also, what's interesting is new developers will have more time because they don't have a family yet. They haven't found a significant other, they haven't had kids, and what will happen is they'll have more time to study. And your more senior developers will have less time to study. And so the people with the new ideas are the ones least equipped to lead the team into a new area. And that's because they don't have time to learn. Next thing I would suggest to change is to start retrospectives with one action item. And so change one thing, and don't be afraid to change your process too. Right? Whatever method of Agile or whatever method of software development that you follow, this is agnostic to that. This does not need to be something that, nothing is taboo to change. If you feel like estimation is limiting you, like it did for us, then that might be something you challenge. You might hold on to that one for a while until you feel more trust or more safety. But there are other things, sprint times, how siloed somebody is on a team, and other things along those lines, right? We should be able to realize waste in the system and eliminate that waste, and we can do that one experiment at a time. Start continuous delivery. This is, so not continuous integration. It does not have to be automated, but something that can help push you to experiment more is, are you deployable every day? Are you deployable every week? Are you deployable every 2 weeks, 6 months, a year? One thing that you can really tell the health of your software is how often do you deploy to production or to a production-like environment to a product owner if you have not released yet. And so continuous delivery will drive you to improve your processes like it did for us. And so reducing that cycle time really helped. Stop estimating. It will be a difficult topic, and I know that some people cannot do this. I'll give you an argument a little later about how you could accomplish such a thing. But it may be a good thing to consider, and I think you'll see why in a little bit. Start experimenting. I don't know if you can see that. You can't see that very well. So, if you take one thing away from this talk, it would be to start experimenting. And it could be the way that I suggested or a different way, but pay attention to when you're the frog in the water and the water's slowly increasing in temperature. It might be you have to leave a company, you might, or something along those lines, that emergency may come up if you don't do anything about it. And the only way to really have a process cycle time that's faster than your competitor is to actually be doing the experimentation and utilizing it. I want to talk a little bit about the lofty goals that I had, and I'm sorry that the text translations are no longer there, but I will read things off the slides as we go, and those will be translated. But I think that going back to this slide here, we can see a few things in this grid. And so we created this with a number of ideas of things that we thought were important to us, and then we just said we can continuously retrospect on this as well. And so the key points are on the left here. So how do we interact is the top. The next is how do we code. The next is how do we do business. And the next is how do we innovate. As can you answer those questions for your team? Is there a unified direction for those 4 questions for your team? And can you create something like that for your team if it doesn't exist? Many people may have different ideas about how or what they should be doing. And unless you have kind of a unifying factor, usually not defined by a boss or manager, but defined by the team itself through, it could be retrospectives, it could be other things, but this is that happy, sad retrospective with some dot votes on it, and then action items at the bottom, trying to limit down to 1 action item. And so if you can answer those questions with your team together, you might be able to make something that the team believes in and unifies them in their direction. It's important that we find ways to come together around an idea and share credit with each other. And these exercises are very good at generating them. So I'll talk a little bit about kindness, consideration, respect, being vulnerable, holding trust, and showing appreciation, and psychological safety. So I was told that the word vulnerable doesn't translate well in this case, so I will explain a little bit more on a later slide. So kindness, consideration, and respect. This was kind of the core concept that we built the team initially on, is can we respect each other? Can we be kind to each other? Can we be considerate to each other? I think before, that was not a ground rule, and without that being a ground rule, it's very easy to criticize someone else coming from a bad place. Right? And so it's very difficult to make it so that you can feel safe, right? If you don't have this as a core foundation. We have vulnerability, trust, and appreciation. And so vulnerability, I'll explain a little bit. It is not to allow yourself to be hurt. I think that might be the direct translation. But put yourself in a situation where you could be hurt in order to prove the trust of the relationship, might be a better way to put it. So do you feel comfortable right now saying, I have an idea for a new patent. Will you build on that idea with me? Right? Or do you feel comfortable right now saying, I found a great way to improve our process. Maybe you can help me with it. And do you feel confident that the other person on your team won't take that idea and take credit for it themselves? Right? That's being vulnerable. And can that person then give you feedback about your idea and not be too polite about it? Right? And that's holding trust, being vulnerable to each other. That leads into psychological safety. This idea that, if you're a manager, acknowledging your own fallibility, referring to problems as learning problems instead of execution problems, modeling curiosity by asking a lot of questions. If you're a manager, do you feel comfortable asking questions in front of your team often. If you're not comfortable or you're not doing that, then that could be detracting significantly from psychological safety. Being perfect all the time is one really great way for ruining a relationship with your team. And so being able to be viewed as having a failure and correcting it quickly, or taking feedback that is constructive, can lead to your teams being able to do that with each other. And in the end, you'll have a better product. The next three concepts are no one between code and production, clean code, and Zaro boobs, which I'll explain later. It is intentionally misspelled, but it's loosely defined as 0 bugs, but with a caveat. I'll tell you in a second. So when Yahoo in America was still around, they often talk about this concept about no one between code and production. So no humans in code, between code and production. And what that meant is that they had a culture of automation, automating deployments, automating testing, automating everything that you can about the entire process to get to production. And what that does is it improves your cycle time, and you can try new experiments much more quickly by developing your customer or the idea of your customer quickly. And so we took that as a core concept of saying, can we get to no one between code and production quickly? And that has influenced many of our retrospectives going forward. Even now we're talking about in Amazon AWS, how do we automate the construction of our environment and do it well? Clean Code is the book by Bob Martin, and we want to make sure that our code is readable, understandable, and if it communicates to you in the future or it communicates to other developers well, that may be a definition of done. And so how many people have approached code or had developers approach code? They said, I can't read this at all. This is awful. Who wrote it? I did 5 years ago. It's a very common occurrence, and so clean code became a very important thing for us. And it pays off very much in the long run, because when your code is easy to read when you come in, and you don't have variables like X or some arbitrary character, you get a lot of benefit. Zaro boobs. So there was a software in the past called Bugzilla, or not in the past, it's still a product. And when you run out of bugs in the bug tracker, it says Zaro boobs. It's an intentional misspelling of 0 bugs. And the reason for that is because you've run out of bugs, and it's an acknowledgement that there may be bugs, but we just don't know about them yet. Right? So can you get to Zaro boobs? When I joined my current company, Hunter Industries, first thing I asked when I joined the team was, how many bugs do we have? This was over 300. It was better than my previous company, which was in the thousands. And a lot of them being ignored so that we could get back to the customer quickly, et cetera, et cetera. And what would happen is these bugs would bounce back and forth between developers fixing them. So one developer would fix a bug, and then the other developer would say, hey, you broke my stuff, but they wouldn't find that out for 3 months, 9 months. Next thing I want to talk about is delivering valuable working software to customers daily. Anyone can take a vacation at any time, 0 silos, and effective interdepartmental communication. So for delivering working software to production daily. So this is the kind of thing where I suggested earlier to increase the number of cycles that you can do, or reduce your cycle time, right? Can you show a product owner something new that you've done recently? How long does it take for you to show new functionality to somebody? Can you get to daily? Can you get to sub-daily? We had a team that had 1.5 years with no bug reports from production, and we were delivering twice a day to production. and having these sorts of goals and treating each other with kindness, consideration, and respect, and giving us feedback got us there. And this is a way to kind of measure health in the system. Does anybody have a team where a developer, if they took a vacation, everything would stop? Yeah, it's a very common problem, and having this as a lofty goal is very painful. But what it does is it removes a lot of that the psychological safety problems. Things like, you don't know this code base, so you can't work in it, or that person's not smart enough to work over there. Right? These can be very damaging statements, and being able to say that, hey, that lead developer can take a vacation and nothing would stop is a very important thing to understand. Effective interdepartmental communication. So these are product owners in our environment. One of them is mobbing with us there. The other one is in a side office, but it's very easy to access them. In other situations, we walk over to other people's environments, and we try and interact well. And this means training our software developers to communicate well as well. We read books on communication. We try and create effective written and verbal communication. And improving this over time can really have a huge payoff to all the software development you do, not only because people can more easily talk to each other and give each other feedback, but you can also develop your relationships with other departments and make it so that, if anybody has a chasm between them and another department, and it feels like you can't talk to them without somebody becoming mad, that's kind of a sign that might be a good lofty goal. Continuously develop lofty goals and practices, experiment frequently, and develop the software community. So this is, again, these were a stack of retrospectives that I took, and I think that was after a year. There's a big pile of them, and so we took pictures of each of them and archived them. We don't really look at them, but we thought maybe one day, image recognition or something, it might be useful. But it's important to ask those questions of yourselves again and again so that you can provide direction for the team. Experiment frequently. So this has kind of been the core of the talk, and I just want to continue iterating on that. But having that as a lofty goal will gradually improve you and your process. Develop a software community. So that's why I'm here. I'm developing the software community. Hello. That's Woody Zool teaching a class, and we brought him in to offer free trainings to the community. In those free trainings, we do get applicants that apply for our positions, and so it's a virtuous loop for both the business and for the community. But finding ways to help develop your community by volunteering or speaking at conferences, by training other people outside your company at your company location, this can be a very positive thing. You can meet new people in the industry. You can develop your ideas. We often invite people to visit us in San Diego, and we've had a few people travel all the way from Japan to visit. And in that, we helped develop the software community as well as get new ideas from others. And so many of the questions that I'm asked during these visits lead to action items for us in the future. So this is a completely different topic, but I want to talk about getting executive buy-in for no estimates. It's kind of the last part. And so this is a little bit less about experimentation, but more about why you might want to do this. And I have a little bit of an activity for them. I want to propose to you the software estimation paradox. People who can estimate well what they've done many times, people can estimate well what they've done many times before. Software developers automate what is repetitive or time-consuming. Can you see where I'm going with this? The software estimation paradox. For a software developer to estimate something to estimate something well, they must have done it many times before and not automated it. It's the antithesis of what we're trying to do. Why would a software developer not automate something that they did many times before? Now, that might be a refactoring, that might be boilerplate code, that might be an environment configuration, a code generator, abstraction. It leads to better estimates when you don't, right? When you don't change, when you don't automate, it leads to better estimates. I've automated many things in the last 8 years, and during that time, I have not made an estimate on a software project, and my teams have not either. And we could create a virtuous, continuous improvement loop because of it. So going back to emergencies. I was working for a military contractor, and there was an emergency, and our contacts at the military came and said, we really need to get this done really quickly, and we don't want to estimate it, we just want you to start working. That's what they told us. It was amazing. We had our product owner travel 3 hours in the morning to get to us every day, and then 3 hours at night back. And they would give us all of the requirements and answer questions impromptu, and we could show them our progress every day. It was the first experience that I had working this way. There was very little meeting time, there was very little confusion, and we got a lot done very quickly. Very important. The corporate emergency, this is when mob programming started. I told that story a little bit earlier. The product development emergency, that's when mob programming scaled. There was a product that had been going nowhere for a while, and we created a better way of doing things, and then software development practices were audited by an external auditor, and that allowed us to scale mob programming, and that emergency caused us to get here. And I still want to reiterate, you don't need the emergency to start experimenting. It's just what happened to us. All of these emergencies resulted in abandoning estimation. So on some core level, everybody knew that it was slowing us down, and getting rid of it was important. But it never came through until there was an emergency to cause everybody to think about it critically. So why was it so good? We had better interactions, faster. We understood each other, and were able to communicate quickly, and we were able to deliver continuously and show a minimum viable product and release frequently, and all of it became very good very quickly. And it was it was a very good effect. And so that was part of paying attention to what was happening, right? Is collecting data at those critical moments where that data can be very useful to you in keeping those practices and not going back to the way things were before. That's the transparency, consistency idea. How do we get there without panic? So we have the top-down and top-down, bottom-up, and bottom-up is not the problem. So developers might become very comfortable in this environment very quickly. But you might have other systems at play that make it very difficult to try and make these things work. So I've kind of defended not estimating to the businesses that I work for in 3 key ways. To the corporation, it was important to show that we could provide transparency and progress. And so we can show every day that we've been releasing. We can show what's been created, and then the product owners make the decisions about what gets created, and then we can show the effectiveness of the product owner's decisions. We had a product development defense, and this is kind of the idea of, when will we have it, and things along those lines. We talked a lot about minimum viable product, and prioritizing on cost of delay, etc. And a financial defense. So new ways of finding out how to be accountable to finance-driven requests. And so estimates typically end up becoming a false sense of accountability, because making an estimate and meeting it can then mean that you've been scored on something, right? With an emergency, others giving up the current process. So to get no estimates with an emergency, others give up the current process, you have small successes, and you find the successes of others, right? Without an emergency, you pay attention to the distribution of innovation, people's trusted information sources. So this is like finding out what articles, business articles, that your boss likes, and going to that publication and finding supporting materials for the things that you want to try. This can be very important for just influencing over time, but a lot of people don't think about this as an avenue. And so in America, Harvard Business Review is very popular, and many executives subscribe to it. And so I found out, do my executives look at that? Yes, they do. Here are articles about Agile, here are articles about estimation, things along those lines. Harvard Business Review has an article on not making estimates. And then smaller investments for high potential returns is budgeting small experiments to our business, and awesome data visualization, flowcharts or other systems of visualizing data. If you can automate data visualization, then you can do something interesting. So I want to try something real quick. I want everybody to come up with an equation, maybe get in groups of 2 to 3, and come up with an equation about what are the true costs of estimates. And so you might put things in there like the time it takes to make them is an obvious cost. And the time it takes to get started on the projects between them, right? That also can be a cost. So get together and discuss, what are the costs that come with estimates? Are there side effects? Okay, you have a minute. Thank you. Please discuss. Let's go ahead and stop there. Is there anybody that wants to share the different costs that you came up with?
共有いただける方、マイクを差し入れます。
再見積もりが必要になる。見積もりをするときに考えすぎる。見積もりと実績のズレを管理したくなる。マイク入ってなかったみたいでもう一回。再見積もりが必要になる。見積もりの説明のためのコミュニケーションが必要になる。見積もりをするときに考えすぎてしまう。見積もりとそれに対する実績のズレを管理したくなる。
Okay, thank you. That's very good. Does anybody have any more other than that?
他に出てないことが。
So this is about one of the previous companies I worked at, but estimation takes a lot of time and mental energy, and so some of our estimation planning sessions would take over 3 hours, and then afterwards, nobody really wanted to work, everybody just wanted to go out for coffee or do something. And so it's not just a loss of 3 hours, it's a loss of 4 or 5 hours of people saying like, oh, I'm so tired, I can't even think anymore.
Very cool. Any others?
はい。
こちらで意見が出たのが、直前スケジュールだと余裕があってもサボって終わらせないみたいな。
Okay, yes. So that relates to what is called Parkinson's law, and it's the amount of time a task takes will take up, if it's early, will take up the amount of time it took to make the amount of time estimated originally. So that's in Parkinson's law. Okay. Let me go ahead and explain a new concept, and then we'll do it again, and then we'll get very close to the very end. So, is anybody familiar with complex systems and second-order effects? So this is the idea that if you have an intent, if you give candy to your software developers, you think, oh, the candy will make them happy, and we'll be more productive, right? That's a first-order effect. But what happens as a second order effect? Well, the candy may make everybody gain weight in the office. And everybody will be a little bit less healthy, a little bit more tired, and that might create a destructive loop for the team. I read a story in a book that was talking about how Google had put candy in their lines, and then they said, well, too many people are eating candy now and they're being unhealthy, so let's put it inside a drawer all the way at the back of the cafeteria. And so somebody has to bend all the way down to go pick up the candy. So a second order effect is an unintentional side effect, right? You don't want your developers to get overweight and tired, and then your software gets worse than better, right? So I want to ask, what are the second order effects of estimating? What's not obvious about, so Parkinson's law is maybe one of them, but what's not an obvious side effect of estimations? For the health of the team, for the safety in the team, the clean code, okay? So 2 more minutes, discuss what are the second order effects, the non-obvious effects of making estimates. Please discuss. For a second. Does anybody have a list of second order effects that they'd like to share, or just one or anything?
先ほどお話があった見積もりに非常に時間がかかって水増ししちゃうっていう話があったと思うんですけど、それによってチームのメンバーの不平不満が心の中に溜まっていく。で、それによって、チームの状態が悪くなる可能性があると思います。
Yes. It's important to pay attention to. That is a cost. Right? Any others?
見積もると見積もりを当てたくなるので、ものすごく早く終わった時に報告しなくなる。
And that is a cost. Any others?
どうやっていう効果は聞こえてきます。
見積もりはすでに決められていたこととして受け入れられるので、より良いやり方を考えなくなります。
The improvement, yeah, it encourages stagnation. Others?
見積もりによる心理的プレッシャーによって、やっぱり隣の人と話しなくなったりとか、そういうコミュニケーションがロストしたりとか、それによってのこう意思疎通によって品質悪くなるみたいな、とか、もろもろのそのプレッシャーによる弊害が起こる。
Yes. So if you develop an estimate and you're trying to meet that estimate, and then you realize that you're running late on your estimate becomes a deadline, and you want to meet your estimate, and so you might say, I'm not going to go ask the product owner clarification, I'm just going to make it, and make assumptions, right? And that can be damaging as well. Others?
はい、見積もりの成功体験、見積もりがうまくいった状態、つまり自動化できていない、繰り返しの作業を、見積もりの成功体験が積み重なることで自動化していくモチベーションが下がっていく。
Yes. Okay, I'm going to continue on, but I think you can see there's a lot of hidden costs, and as you add those values up, it may be very difficult to justify keeping them, but it also may be very difficult to convince others to get rid of them. So that's the paradox that I present to you. I want to talk really quickly before I'm out of time. And so, if you have a 3-year project estimated out, then there's a lot of gambling that you'll be doing. So, does everybody know the difference between horizontal slices and vertical slices? A horizontal slice may be do the entire database for our whole 3 years project. A vertical slice may be do the UI, the server, and the database for one feature and deploy it. You want vertical slices, you do not want horizontal slices. Long-term estimation, that can lead to the Parkinson's effect. You can also have many side effects. Another very kind of form of this that is very difficult to deal with is sales teams selling the software before you have it ready to sell. That causes very similar pressures, very similar problems. This is an implementation that works for us. So vertical slices, continuous integration, continuous delivery, single item work in progress, Kanban, higher iteration on a value stream, so value streaming, mapping your process, super tiny minimum viable product, and then iterate on the product, and Zaro Boost. So we've been able to not do estimates for this long because I think that we're transparent and consistent with these practices. Estimates are not deadlines. Without estimates and with continuous delivery to users, you will have more working software and more value than if you had estimated it. How many people in the room have done feature cuts due to horizontal slicing and an estimate turning into a deadline? I found it very helpful to do a historic Gantt chart rather than a future Gantt chart. This is the idea of saying, this is what we've done in a Gantt chart. People like it very much. It's very good. And this actually helped me convince a lot of people that we were producing a lot. It did not have to look into the future. It just looked into the past. And then we automated it. We took our Gherkin scenarios and checked when they went into source control, and that was the time it took to create that feature. And so anybody can look at a historic Gantt chart of everything that we did at any time. Sorry, Books. Talked about that a lot. Cost per development stream, so one feature working in progress. You might have a mob, that might be a development stream, and that can then show things. You've heard of the 80-20 rule. 80% of users use 20% of the software. So build that 20% to capture 80% of the market before building anything else, right? And deliver it. This is a system that we use for prioritizing features. So this is cost of delay. Check the cost of delay for any feature of any project. And then determine and eliminate the known unknowns. So everything that you know can go wrong. Budget a proof of concept to eliminate the known unknowns. If you're successful, budget and deploy a minimum viable product. And as you discover unknown unknowns, things that you didn't know could go wrong, that went wrong, go back and do the same loop again. In this cycle, you can present that to, you can choose what to do next very quickly, act on it, and learn from what you discovered. And the only estimation that you're really doing here is, what's the smallest feature right now that I can get into production that has the highest impact? That would be the cost of delay for shrinking your feature. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Lucian. This is how you contact me. If you're in California, ask for a visit. We'll set up a visit. And thank you very much.
クリスさんありがとうございました。クリスさん今言ったように、カリフォルニアサンディエゴの近くに、阪田印刷さんありますので、もし、近くまで行くことあったら、羽田からだ、いや成田からだと2駅ぐらいで行きます。ぜひやっていただければと思います。あとですね、なんとこの土曜日にですね、カリフォルニアまで行かなくてもクリスのワークショップをやりますので、この1階上の4階でやりますので、もしよかったら聞いてください。はい、ぜひお願いします。まだ席がありますので、よろしくお願いします。じゃあ最後にクエスチョンじゃあ質問を受けたいと思います。さまざまなお話だったと思うんですけど、ご質問あったらぜひご教えください。はい。
Thank you for your talk. listeners are asking in Japanese. 実験について、チームでこういうことを実験しようと思うときに、その実験をどういうふうになんていうのかな、デザインするというか、定義するというか、しますか。で、質問の意図なんですけど、例えばあるチームでは、振り返りでこういうことをやろうって言って、それ1週間後に、何をやろうと思ったかすでに忘れて、次何しようかですね、実験の結果を振り返らないことがよくあります。で、別に、また別のチームだと、その何をやるっていうのをすごく細かく定義して、仮説は何だ、期待する結果は何だ、どうやって測定するんだということをきっちり決めようとするんですけど、それはそれでまた結構大変だったりして、で、クリスのところでは、その実験をやろうというときに、どの程度のことを話して、その後終わった後にどういうことを話したりしていますか。
Yes, so it's different between each team, and the main thing that we do is we ask everybody to pay attention to that. So I will go around and ask, what's your latest experiment? What's your latest thing that you're trying differently? And my hope is that everybody has an answer to that question. Now, in the case of a team forgets about it, I would then hold the retrospective about forgetting about the experiments, right? And then the outcome of that should influence a decision that will help us make ourselves more accountable to that. But if you do that double loop learning, you retrospect about your retrospectives, then you'll quickly discover that. And we've had many teams that have done that, and different ways that they do it is they actually, we have the mod programming timer, and they will put retro in the timer and evaluate experiment in the timer. And so 45 minutes later, they'll come back and say, did that work for the last 45 minutes? Right? And that might be a micro experiment. And that can grow in any direction. And if you try and grow it organically, I think you'll get there very quickly. But noticing when something is a problem and having a retrospect about it, that might be a responsibility of a leader if it is falling apart for a team.
Thank you.
はい、もう一件ぐらい質問が取れるかなと思うんですけど、ここで聞くか、まあ、サンディエゴで聞くかどうしても。あ、後ろで手を挙げてください。3件あったかった。はい。もうどんどんいっちゃいましょう。
フラットな組織だという話だったと思うんですけど、その構造は何人ぐらいの人数でも、適用できると思いますか。例えばエンジニアが数百人いるとかっていう組織でもフラットな構造でいけるのかっていうのが気になってます。
Oh, yes, okay. So again, this will be experimentation, I think. The main thing is to pay attention to other companies that have done this. So there's a company, Vortex, that makes skiing equipment, and they're flat, and they grow to 250 people, and then they say beyond 250 people, get a new building and make a new organization and grow that building. And so there's also Valve software, which makes video games and publishing systems for video games. And they are completely flat as well. And they have different systems for basically taking on leadership for an initiative. And these flat organizations do have their problems. And so a lot of the times it's paying attention and retrospecting about, when is something going wrong? How can we make it change? I believe the most difficult thing that Valve was having was they weren't really firing people that they should have been firing. And the reason for that was because they could always go to a different project and disappear from the people that were aware of their progress. And so there's definitely a need to figure those things out, and paying attention really helps in forming experiments on it.
手が上がったんで、あと2つ質問もらって。
Thank you.
後ろで質問が上がってます。
質問なんですけれど、2つ質問いただいてます。
1個でお願いします。
はい、これ。じ じゃあ、質問なんで、高い目標を掲げるっていうのがあったと思うんですけれども、それに対して高い目標をいつまでに、実行できるかっていう期限は、考えないのでしょうか。でその期限がもしある場合だと、なんかそういった見積もりに概算ですかもしれないですけど、該当するんじゃないかなと思ってまして、質問させていただきました。
Yeah, so the lofty goals do not have deadlines. This is what do we believe is unattainable right now, but we'd like to be doing it. And so the main question you should ask yourself is, what is our ideal way of doing our work? And what side effects, what second order effects do we want to come out of the work that we do? Let's make decisions in this direction. And then if there is a leader in the group, or then socialize that, or create the lofty goals together as a group and socialize it amongst each other. And so that might be printed posters and things like that that can help with that.
もう一人手挙がってましたけど、後ろ
わかりました。ありがとうございます。
もう一人いらっしゃいました。あ、いらっしゃいました。はい、お願いします。
先ほどレトロスペクティブの大切なこと、透明性があって、結果が出ていて、でそして一貫性があるという話だったと思うんですけど、その結果に対してっていうところが、時には結果が、悪い結果だったりっていうところもあったりすると思うんですけど、それでも、レトロスペクティブは広がっているものなのかどうかというところをちょっと伺えたらなと思います。
Yes, so the results really mean, so are you learning and are you able to have wins as well as failures? If it's failing all the time, then transparency should show that there's some bad process and we should change something. If it's succeeding all the time, then that may be that we're not trying to change enough. And so it's finding the place in the middle that says we are transparent about both our wins and our losses. And in that, we can show the results of our wins as being a positive effect, and there should be safety for people to accomplish that. And speaking specifically to the distribution of innovation, we want people to understand when something is working so that other people adopt it. And so for my teams, for example, we host lean coffee events to help cross-pollinate things. And so I have a member of each team join for a lean coffee, and then we talk about the best practices that we have, and then some people will try it in other areas, and so it starts to circulate. And that is a healthy thing. And that's transparency and results, and consistency.
すみません、ありがとうございます。はい、じゃあご質問は以上にしたいと思います。じゃあ、クリス・ルーシアさん、今日どうもありがとうございました。最後に皆さん、盛大な拍手をお願いします。